take together to impact our local communities, our country, and our world, ensuring that we take part in the Jewish value of tikkun olam, which means repairing the world.
Powell family. So
Powell family. And you're and you're from the Evans.
Would everyone else please mute your lines?
The Social Action Committee recently had its first meeting of the new year, and our next meeting is on November 3rd at 6 p.m. on Zoom. Check out Emmett Mail for the Zoom link. It's the perfect meeting to attend.
Please let in Powell family. Let me see. Do you have the
just close out the close it out and go back in again, you think?
Yeah, but let me make sure you have the right number.
Oh.
Attend on November 3rd at 6 p.m. on Zoom. It's the perfect meeting to attend and hear about our current efforts that are underway and see where you might want to lend your time and talents. The Social Action Committee currently has groups focusing on the areas of legislative advocacy, immigrant justice, and our partnerships with both ICDI, the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants, and the Chicago Jewish Coalition for Refugees, environmental justice, advocacy, and education, both in our newly starting Dayenu Circle, as well as our involvement with the Environmental Justice Evanston Committee, our local partnerships with both Connections for the Homeless, Interfaith Action of Evanston, a Just Harvest Soup Kitchen, and the Soup Kitchen housed at Beth Emmett, our ongoing racial discussion group that meets and discusses articles and books on topics such as redlining, economic racial disparities, and legislative racialized impacts. And finally, our racial action subgroup, which is the group that resulted in the planning of this incredible program and our follow-up programs in both November and December. So now I'll turn it over to Matt Feldman, who is spearheading this action and planning for our Beth Emmett Reparations educational campaign. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Lisa. Our team of Beth Emmett workers who are supporting reparations are very committed, and our numbers are growing as people hear about the effort. We have several initiatives underway in our efforts to inform and inspire you in support of reparations here in Evanston and nationally. One initiative is focused on education, and the panel discussion tonight is the first of 3 education sessions planned between now and year end, and we'll tell you more about those sessions later. We've also developed and will continue to develop communications to inform and inspire you about the current reparations events, and also provide you with information focused to address specific questions raised by members of the synagogue, such as articulating the religious and cultural rationales for supporting reparations for Black Americans. There will soon be a webpage devoted to reparations through which you can access these documents and also find links to articles and media that we hope will inform and inspire you. We will also be providing information about how you can support local and national reparations financially, should you wish to do so. And finally, we're organizing an outreach effort to coordinate our support with other religious institutions and nonprofit organizations seeking to advance the cause of reparations here and across the country. My role tonight is to introduce our extraordinary panelists, who I am sure will inform and inspire you. So in the interest of reserving most of the time for them, my introductions will be far less expansive than their accomplishments merit. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee represents the 18th Congressional District of Texas, which is centered in Houston. Among her many accomplishments, she is the principal sponsor of H.R. 40, about which you will hear tonight. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky is well known to Beth Emmett members, as she is herself a longtime member here. But for the benefit of our many guests, Congresswoman Schakowsky represents the 9th Congressional District of Illinois, which includes the city of Evanston and other towns where Beth Emmett members reside, and has a well-established record of successfully advocating for gender and racial equity. And of course, she is a co-sponsor of H.R. 40. Robin Rue Simmons is founder and executive director of First Repair, a nonprofit organization that seeks to inform local reparations initiatives around the country. A former alderman representing Evanston's 5th Ward, she was a driver in conceiving and enacting the city's Evanston reparations ordinances, a nationally recognized spokesman on reparations, and a national leader in the movement toward reparations. The Reverend Dr. Michael Nabors is senior pastor of the Second Baptist Church in Evanston, president of the Evanston North Shore NAACP, and a founding member of the steering committee for Evanston Reparations, and serves as well as a resource to other clergy and municipalities engaged in reparations initiatives across the country. Finally, serving as a moderator tonight is Rabbi Andrea London, senior rabbi of Beth Emmett Synagogue and a leader in interfaith and social justice initiatives in Evanston and in the United States. And with that, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Rabbi London.
Thank you to Lisa and to Matt and to all of the wonderful members at Beth Emmett who helped to arrange this panel tonight. You can see we have many social justice initiatives, and reparations is at the top of the list of things that Beth Emmett is concerned about, interested in, working on, and is really excited to be able to have this panel tonight so that we can learn as a congregation, as a community, and we can push this effort forward in Evanston. And so we're delighted to have this extraordinarily distinguished panel of friends. I can't even call you guests except for Sheila Jackson Lee. You're really all friends of Beth Emmett. And we're so happy that you could be here tonight. We are going to begin with Pastor Nabors speaking, and then Representative Jan Schakowsky, and then Robin Rue Simmons, and then finally Representative Sheila Jackson Lee will be speaking. Pastor Nabors will be providing a context of reparations movement in the United States, both historically and the current drivers. Congresswoman Schakowsky will talk about the benefits of reparations to our society, and Robin Rue Simmons will talk about the local effort and the work that she is also doing nationally and how we can be engaged with that. And finally, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee will be talking about HR 40 and what's happening on the federal level and how we can be engaged with that. We are really delighted to be able to have them all here tonight. And as we go through, each of them is going to have some opening remarks, and then we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. If you have questions, since I'm the moderator tonight, please address them to me, Rabbi Andrea London. You can chat me, and I will be fielding those questions. And after the initial remarks, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions to our distinguished panelists. And so welcome, my friend, my colleague, Pastor Michael Nabors.
Thank you so much, Rabbi London. I want to say and echo the sentiments that you've already shared. I'm delighted to be a part of such a distinguished panel. I'm grateful and honored to know some of them personally over the years, and just grateful to be a part of this important discussion that we are engaging in tonight. I also want to say for the folks that are listening in that Rabbi London and Beth Emmett have a long and storied history of being social justice advocates in the Evanston community. And I'm grateful that the church I serve has been a partner with them in that effort over the years, and we have networked together on a number of different issues. I'm also honored to be here with my colleague Robin Rue Simmons, who is without a doubt the leader, I want to make that very specific, the leader of reparations in the Evanston community, and has already made an incredible name for herself as a national and international advocate for reparations. I'm also grateful to Representative Jan Schakowsky and also to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. And of course, Matt and Lisa did all of the groundwork and all of the logistics for making this happen. So Rabbi, you know me very well, so I'm grateful that you had me start this discussion, because you know I'm a Baptist preacher, and if you had me go at the end, I probably would have gone on and on. So I'm glad to be able to start and to try to give a backdrop, a sort of larger context regarding reparations in our nation, and to provide some context. So reparations, the question is, what is reparations? And obviously it is repairing damage that has been done based upon discrimination. And one of the things that I want to quickly share with you is a question that was asked to the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he responded in this way. He was asked the same question, and he said, I'll say two things. The first is that when you injure a person, the fact that you know stopped the action that's injuring them does not mean that the person has been repaired. If somebody is stabbing you, it's good that they stop stabbing you, but it'd be much better if you were bandaged, taken to the hospital, and gotten a chance to heal. And so I think that's just a wonderful way of describing reparations, both in a historical sense and currently as well. So in the larger historical context, I have learned that conversation about reparations did not just begin at the conclusion of the Civil War. Kate Masur, a wonderful professor of history at Northwestern University, released a book earlier this year called Until Justice is Done. And she sought to try to describe the origins of the civil rights movement. And she described civil rights that included reparations, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, when there were slave masters who promised their slaves freedom if they fought in the Revolutionary War as one of the first descriptions of a promise of reparations. Well, after the Revolutionary War ended, most of those slave owners, if not all of them, did not free their slaves, but that was a promise that went unfulfilled. And then, of course, we know about reparations in the historical sense coming from the Union General Sherman, who promised at the end of the Civil War in Texas that every Black man who experienced freedom after the Emancipation Proclamation would be given 40 acres and a mule. That is a promise that came from General Sherman. And of course, we know that that did not happen either. In the middle of all of that, it's important for us to know that there were all sorts of damage that was being done that was not just related to the institution of slavery. We know about the Northwest expansion. We know that when the 13 colonies were the only part of the United States, the expansion went west into a territory called the Northwest Territory. Well, it's important for many people to know that Black laws, quote unquote, were actually established in an effort to prevent Blacks from having free movement from one of these states to another, and was also specifically designed to prevent them from owning homes, from having their own housing. And this goes back, you all, as far as 1803 and 1804. So when we talk about the history of reparations, and when we talk especially about housing, it's important to know how discriminatory patterns existed so long ago. And I also want to currently take that up to more modern times, and especially at the conclusion of World War II. Both the GI Bill and also practices from the FHA and HOLC, both housing organizations in the United States, actually created practices that were prejudicial and discriminatory against people of color. So when you look at the timeline, you can see that the damage done specifically to Black people regarding their sense of freedom, regarding their sense of opportunities, it has been here since this country actually was established and started. So it's important for you to know that. Now, one of the questions that I was asked to respond to also was what is reparations and how does it differ from social welfare programs? Well, we talked about how it's repairing the damage that is done. Social welfare programs are not designed to look at damage that was done. They're designed to assist and to help people where they are right now. When it comes to reparations, we're looking at the long history. We're looking at how people got to where they were and not just the fact that they are there right now. And another question I was asked to respond to is, what is the urgency and are the risk of lack of support or indifference? Are there risk? Well, there is an urgency, but let me say this, there's been an urgency for 245 years. So, I can't say that there is a more urgent time in 2021 than there was in 1921 or 1821. The urgency is there. And the compilation of the history of discrimination and the damage that has been done just continues over and over again, and it gets larger and larger. And I know my other distinguished colleagues are going to talk about this, but this whole idea of generational wealth being passed on from one generation to another was stymied intentionally against Black people and other people of color, but we're talking about Black people tonight. And as a result of that, we have not been able to pass wealth on from one generation to another. And of course, I also want to say that the idea and the talk about reparations is so important from a historical point, because it lays the groundwork for the kind of debate and dialogue that we need to be experiencing right now. One of the things I want to say again about the rabbi and other houses of worship in the Evanston community, earlier this year, when City Council was looking to pass something to begin the process of having money go toward housing, it's important for you to know that those houses, many houses of worship in Evanston, actually wrote letters of support to the reparations movement in Evanston directly to City Council. And the rabbi wrote a letter, and folks from Beth Emmett wrote a letter from a Jewish perspective based upon their sacred texts, and other houses of worship wrote a letter of support based upon the Bible as well. So I think that is important for you all to know. And finally, I think I had 10 minutes, and I think my time is up. The rabbi is very friendly with me. She usually gives me the eye, but let me say this. The last question was, has the increased visibility of violence against Blacks during the pandemic provided a momentum for reparations? I don't know the answer to that, Rabbi, but I do know it is a wonderful question. We do know that there is increased violence against Black citizens, and some as recently as within the last couple of days. But I do want to say, whether that increased violence is helping the case of reparations or not, the case for reparations stands on its own, because of the historical damage that has been done due to racism in this country. And I think that everybody historically is aware of that. And I'm grateful for being able to hopefully place this in some context as we begin our discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Nabors, for that amazing historical overview. And you did not go over your time. I would have given you the eye. Congresswoman Schakowsky, you're on mute.
Let me associate myself first with Pastor Nabors. Thank you to everyone, especially to him, for his clarion voice in our community, his leadership and his partnership in all things to create justice, not only here in Evanston, but in a much wider circle. So thank you, Robin Rue Simmons. You are the woman that really has made the issue of reparations a national issue. I'm so thrilled that my colleague Sheila Jackson Lee, who does have this legislation, will be speaking about it. So let me just say a few things. I have to say, on a personal note, that the pandemic awakened me to the immediate legacy, the proximity of slavery to what is happening right now in ways that, in some ways that I didn't expect it. I'm sure every African-American family would have understood things that I realized in high relief during the pandemic. The degree to which the African-American community suffered so much greater than other communities during the pandemic. Of course, we had seen all the police violence. This was not just George Floyd, but certainly Jacob Blake and our, a son of our own community, shootings here. But beyond that, the fact of housing, the peril of being thrown out of your home. And fortunately, we did have a moratorium on evictions, but that has now expired. The healthcare, the likelihood of Black people dying at much greater rates than white people from the COVID virus. You name any kind of parameter, it was always worse. We began to look carefully during this period of COVID of the way that Black women die in the state of Illinois at about 7 times the rate of white women in childbirth. The lack of delivery of services was just so incredible. And I thought, and then we see all the efforts to limit voting rights and that have been going on all over the country, one after another. The effort to reinstitute Jim Crow laws, literally. So we're feeling it all the time, and we have to be fighting it all the time. And you know, in some ways, things are getting worse. I want to just talk a little bit about what's happening in Chicago. Chicago has the largest life expectancy gap of anywhere in the country between Black and whites. Residents in the predominantly white neighborhood of Streeterville live on average, a wealthy community, till 90, and people who live in Englewood, the average life expectancy is 60, 30 years different. We see the gap in Black and white ownership at record highs right now. You know, we're not talking about a diminution of some of these differences. We're seeing a growth right now. And it is really frightening to, you know, see you know, words like a widening of the gap, the largest difference in life expectancy. These things that we want to be seeing diminish are right now in our country increasing and demanding us actually to go to work. So, you know, as I said, Sheila, I'm going to leave it all to her to talk about HR 40. But the good news is that there are 174 co-sponsors of that legislation. I'm one of the original co-sponsors. This is not a fly-by-night idea. This is not something new. And it was John Conyers more than 3 decades ago that had introduced the first piece of legislation. So this has been boiling, simmering maybe is a better word, for a long time, but now we're beginning to bring it to a boil in the Congress of the United States. And we have been helped along. And that's why I wanna call out Lisa's name and the activism at Beth Emmett Synagogue. Because what we saw during this pandemic and ongoing, Black Lives Matter. Men and women, and often women in the leadership, powerful men and women standing up and challenging the status quo and challenging the naysayers and saying Black Lives Matter. You can criticize that, but we are going to make a difference. And the organizing was not just among Black people. We saw people of every race, of every religion, and certainly people in our synagogue involved in these marches and these demonstrations and demanding change. And that is what's going to matter. You know, I've been an organizer most of my life. Still, I like to consider myself an organizer. And it's these mobilizations of ordinary people that are finally going to really make the change. We have to be out there loudly, clearly, unapologetically demanding the end of this new wave of Jim Crow, and to establish real reparations, so that we see justice, demand justice, and win justice. And so I'm just really excited to be part of this movement, part of Beth Emmett, part of this discussion today, because we are seeing progress. I am so proud, Robin, I want to tell you, to say that I am representing the first city in the United States of America to actually enact reparations. And I know there's ongoing discussion, but you made this happen. And there are people right now who are benefiting from what you have done and have started a conversation that is now in Detroit, in California, all over the country. People are beginning to talk reparations. So I'm just so appreciative of that, and stand alongside of you as an activist, as a voice, and of course as a member of the United States Congress, where we are pushing this law and want to make it a reality. So I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And I would like to turn it to Robin Rue Simmons.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, I wasn't host. I'm so happy to be here tonight. Rabbi London, thank you for all that you are doing within the synagogue and in the community. And yes, I am a friend to your congregation, and I have actually many personal friends there. Your community and membership has been valuable in helping us build and strengthen the work that we're doing locally here in Evanston. So thank you, and thank you to all of the members. I still get excited that I'm able to serve in this capacity in my own city among leaders that I consider mentors. And Dr. Nabors may not know it, but many times I've gone to his 8 o'clock service before my 11 o'clock service to get a word. And Congresswoman Schakowsky, I have admired your leadership for so long, so grateful to serve with you. And the Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and her bold, uncompromised leadership of HR 40 has been incredible. So I'm going to make sure that I cover all the questions that were posed. And it is important to note that the city of Evanston is an early adopter of moving beyond the theory of reparations into the practice. And it didn't start in March when we passed our first initiative. It actually didn't even start in 2019 when we passed our local policy. In 2002, our city passed a resolution on slavery reparations led by Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste after his return from the World Conference Against Racism in Durban. He had the support of the Congresswoman. I've seen all of the archives. And that is when our city of Evanston committed to reparations for people of African descent. And fast forward, we've continued working. We've implemented various equity programs, and we've done a good job at smart policy, but we have still remained in similar gaps that the Congresswoman mentioned in Chicago as it relates to racial gaps. Household income gap in Evanston is $46,000 a year. Our life expectancy gap is 13 years. We have an achievement gap we've all been fighting about for many years. And so we have taken a step to localize reparations, and those steps include the passage of 2002 resolution. In 2019, through a community-led, robust process of engagement, we passed a recommendation from the Equity Empowerment Commission unanimously. It's important to note that happened in September of 2019. In November of 2019, we passed what is known as Resolution 126R19, which set aside the funding from our recreational cannabis to advance reparations. And through a reparations committee, we took the information from the community to prioritize what the Black community valued as reparations that participated at that time in 2019, and implemented our first initiative, which is the restorative housing program that we are all hearing about now. And so through a year, through COVID and all the barriers of meeting, the committee and the community worked together to pass this legislation. And we are well into that process. Applications are still open until November 5th. We have more than 100 applications, and we will make our disbursements this year. The inspiration and concept for local reparations truly came from an epiphany through my experience as a Black woman in Evanston living in a segregated West End of the 5th Ward. I saw the difference in access and quality of life that I had versus my white friends and neighbors at my school. And I knew that we had to do something radically different. And I've always supported HR 40, of course, but I knew then that it's not just slavery in those conditions, it's the vestiges of slavery. We can pick any number of crimes against humanity, as the United Nations calls them, but any number of egregious acts against the Black community to begin redress. And in Evanston, fortunately, we had a report that was done by Dino Robinson at Shorefront Legacy Center with support from the Evanston History Center and Jenny Thompson. And we were able to understand that we had specific anti-Black policies on our books, which includes housing and zoning laws between 1919, 1921, that were enforced and practiced until fair housing was passed. And so that frames the guidelines of our reparations policy. And so it was in that moment that I thought, we'll start within our purview. I'm a local elected leader. This is what I have the ability to do with my collaborators here in town and our policymakers, and we'll start there. And the work began, I'm gonna say, back in 2002, and not today as we know it. The importance of this City Council resolution to acknowledge the wrongs and ban racism is obviously important. First, we have to, what's known as the first component of reparation, we need to guarantee that we will not repeat these terrible acts. We need to acknowledge the egregious acts, identify the harm, and commit to repair and redress and steps towards justice. An action plan that is funded and tangible and measurable and not ceremonial. And that's what we have done. It's important that we understand our history so that we don't repeat it. And then the rationale behind the reparations ordinance and the nature of the first program. So for reparations, we cannot locally have a reparations initiative that really speaks to the responsibility of Congress. We had to look hyper locally at our actions in our city, and those were found in zoning and housing laws. And so that is the policy that we can repair here, and that's what we're working on. There is a direct correlation between the initiative that we have implemented and the harm, and that is housing. So we have housing injury where we stripped away wealth from Black families and not having access to build equity and wealth in their homes. We're now giving redress by $25,000 direct benefits to begin to build on wealth in housing through purchase or renovations or paying down mortgage debt. And so there is a direct correlation, and that's necessary. Another thing that's very important that we've done is understand the need that beyond our commitments at the City of Evanston in housing, it's important that we also have access to broaden our redress. And so the Reparations Stakeholder Authority has been formed and launched. It has been seeded by the Evanston Community Foundation, is currently under the leadership of Dino Robinson and Dr. Nabors. And we are able to receive funds to bring repair in other areas beyond housing. And so that fund is going to be very important as we look at issues related to health and education and other areas that we don't have named in our city policy. And that will always be governed by a Black body of stakeholders and having the full authority to determine the repair. The Evanston Community Foundation Fund so it's been seeded and that fund is established. So as one of the first cities to succeed in implementing this legislation, here are some of the keys that were important in passing it. One, it was a community voice. So we don't do anything in Evanston without community engagement. And that is the same for reparations, even more so. And not just the community, but the Black community, the injured community. And they participated in the process. It's very important that you have a legal expert. And we have a brilliant team at the City of Evanston led by Attorney Nicholas Cummings. It's very important that philanthropy is involved in expanding the work. And we have that partnership at Evanston Community Foundation. But more importantly, national experts and scholars and academics and economists from across the nation have reached out to help us understand the work that we're doing and strengthen it. And we must name our early mentors in this work, in COBRA, led by Cam Howard, and NARC, led by Dr. Ron Daniels, and the African American Redress Network. And the list goes on. And we also must acknowledge the significant role of the broad faith community. Beth Emmett and so many other congregations in the city of Evanston, multi-denomination, that have not only begun to educate their congregations, but even fund the work through philanthropy and giving. And those have been some of the keys, but it's also important that we understand, we're patient, we understand the process. We understand that reparations is such a high cost and huge responsibility. The full repair of Black residents in Evanston goes beyond the work that we could do locally. And so we have to be encouraged by what we can do locally while we also support the goals of HR 40 and make sure that we stay focused on our local initiatives while also working towards supporting our congresspeople so that they can bring HR 40 to the floor and we can pass the commission so that work can begin on a federal level.
Thank you for your leadership and for that amazing and clear overview. I would now like to turn it over to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. If you can turn on your video, we don't see you yet. We would love to see you. We'll pin your video so that you can speak about what's happening with HR 40 on a federal level. Thank you for being here, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. I don't see her yet. Zeb, do you have any word on the Congresswoman?
Hi, yeah.
So she's
Hello?
having the same problem I had. I was not able to unmute herself. She's trying to unmute herself.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jeff, can you help her out? Or make her a co-host so she can unmute?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Robin. Always some technological glitch.
She should be able to now. Congresswoman?
This is Congresswoman Jackson Lee. We're doing the best we can. We've been on, but we're not able to.
All right, we're glad to hear you. Thank you for being here. Sorry for the
From
technical.
the beginning, but we are not able to do any. You have to let us get in on the video, whoever's managing the technology. Not working. Unable to start video because you're not letting me stop the video.
Try one more time, Congresswoman.
Okay. All righty. Thank you so very much. I think I'm on now, and thank you so very much for the opportunity to be with you this evening, and thank you to Lisa and Matt. Thank you to Pastor Michael Nabors as well, and to this wonderful congregation, Beth Emmett Free Synagogue. I'm hoping that I'll find my way in the Illinois area and be able to, in essence, be part of Jan's entourage and be able to come to this. And it is very important that we have this opportunity and this reparations discussion. So first of all, let me indicate that Jan Schakowsky is a breath of fresh air. Every time I see her, I feel that there is an uplifting of justice, not just for her district, but for the nation. Thank you, Jan, very much. And thank you for characterizing how the pandemic really focused on the idea of the disparities that have been characterized by the tragedy of slavery that held people in bondage for 246 years. A crisis and sin of the original kind in the United States of America. And therefore, there is a certain rightness to the question of HR 40, the legislation. I know that my dear friend, the Councilwoman, Ru Simmons, who has been a pioneer and been embraced by all of you, has taken her vision and, of course, her commitment to the concept of reparations and her knowledge of John Conyers, our late friend, who entrusted to me to carry this legislation. We've been working together on it from the time I came to Congress. He is now, as we would say in the Black church, gone on to glory, but he entrusted it to me. And we have brought HR 40 further than it has ever been in the history of the United States, sadly so. Even though, as was said, General Sherman articulated the 40 acres and a mule, which some people think is humorous. My good friend Spike Lee has called his film production company that. I take it as a tribute, but it was realistic. They thought it was appropriate for 40 acres and a mule, but even Abraham Lincoln, who knew that he was fighting to save the Union, but recognized that the issue of slavery was a cornerstone to the survival of this nation, knew that there had to be some form of compensation or some response to what slaves had done. Now, let me not be redundant, but I'd be remiss if I did not say that slavery was no workman's comp, no health insurance, no salary, and no way to put away a pension. But in essence, it made cotton king. It built the economic engine of this nation. And the South was landed, and then cotton came, but cotton helped build the Wall Street banks. You in Chicago know that you have the commodities, which is a very, I'm sure, pivotal part of your economy today. And as they made cotton king, they also built the transatlantic slave trade. When we returned to the continent in 2019, the year of return, with Nancy Pelosi and so many of us, the idea was to retrace the steps of how they took slaves from really far north, if you will, and walked them down to the Atlantic, which is the coast. They did that to tire them, to make them less strong so that they could not fight. They needed to have the strength to last, but they didn't want them to have the strength to fight. Many of them went to the watery grave, and the slave castles remained there. And as we walk through them, the smell of death is still there because so many people died. So in the transatlantic trade to Europe, helping to make Europe rich, and the slave traders ended their love of spices and oils and took up the trading of human beings. So the real horror of slavery has never been addressed by this nation, the real pain. And there's something to the DNA. There's something to the DNA of slavery. There's some question that needs to be addressed as whether or not this DNA of hardship, of horrors, have come through generations, which then causes one to fall into the doldrums of extreme racial disparities that continue. Do African Americans walk around with big chips on their shoulder? Of course not. We're members of Congress, we're scientists, we're doctors, we're lawyers. But in the underbelly of America, you still have the statistical knowledge that African Americans fall under every indicia, no matter how many creme de la creme, no matter how many talented 10, no matter how many W. Du Bois, no matter how many Booker T. Washingtons, we fall in the bottom. and this great synagogue, who is courageous enough to have this meeting tonight, you are focusing on that story. And I wish we could go across the nation to soften the third rail that people believe HR 40 is. It is only trying to make people whole, not taking away from anyone else. So the indicia of maternal mortality, the indicia of poor education, the indicia of bad health outcomes. And yes, what was happening in New York during the COVID-19 with all of the sophistication, it started there because Europeans landed. When I say Europeans, people landed from Europe. We can trace China, but in New York, they landed from a European trip. And so particularly from Italy. And however it spread like wildfire, it particularly hit the persons living in what we call these major health housing projects. And those people started teaming out of the housing projects to the local emergency rooms. And they were given an aspirin or not given an aspirin, said you were not sick, you have a cold. And they begin to die in those housing projects. That's where the death began to rise. And you begin to see people in hallways and in ICUs and in operating rooms. And so it hit us, and then to Detroit, and then to New Orleans, where famous jazz musicians died. Cities that were intensely Black were the cities that were hit. COVID-19 made its home because of the lack of healthcare. And then, of course, the criminal justice system. And I'll round it out, but I want you to know how right you are and how right Congresswoman Schakowsky has been in both her amazing work on healthcare, dealing with seniors, and she will find the statistics of Black seniors having less economic cushion to survive without Social Security and Medicare. They're mostly left from jobs without the economic engine for them to survive into a longer life and the end of their life. And so the last roll call that I want to give to you as I talk about HR 40 is a roll call of Black men in particular in the criminal justice system. They became the fodder for the criminal justice system. They became the largest number of individuals that fell to the violence that would occur on the streets, but also tragically to issues dealing with law enforcement. And law enforcement homicides for Black men is the highest number in the country. Many go unreported. So we know about Eric Garner, we know about Tamir Rice, 12 years old, who would have graduated from high school or college or been going to high school, college at this time. Dante Wright, who had a family that was waiting for him. The young man in Colorado who was autistic and was just simply listening to music and said he was different and died. And of course, my constituent, George Floyd, grew up in CUNY Homes, a housing development considered Big Floyd, and only left to go to Minneapolis for a new life. Falsely accused and convicted, and just got recommended for a pardon because the officer who arrested him was the officer who was found to have tainted cases, drug cases, for decades. And of course, the young man in Atlanta, Georgia, who simply wanted to be a person who could fulfill his life in law enforcement, so many others. But that is a statistic that we cannot overcome. So what is HR 40? And where are we today? I want Jan to know that I'm very pleased to say that we have 200 persons committed to voting, and now 210 persons. We're over the time and over the limit of the numbers that could bring this to the floor. And I will engage all of you in this wonderful synagogue to be able to push out to synagogues across America and demand that this legislation come to the floor. Let it be known that it is not a third rail, that it doesn't hurt. You know, we've got funny words in Congress, frontliners, moderates, and others. We're all human beings. This is all about humanity. And it will be those of you, like our council member who had this wonderful program, taking the marijuana refunds, marijuana profits, if you will, and doing this magnificent program of $10 million to give people a lifeline for having a home, an investment in a home. And that is something that could be one of the solutions. So when we say HR 40, it said the Commission to Study Slavery. It includes in their apology that was never received. And then, of course, the whole idea of studying, of creating reparation proposals. Please, let's put a stop sign. I am not going to Mrs. Jones' house, knock on the door and ask her to give me a check. The federal government sanctioned slavery, sanctioned discrimination, sanctioned disparities. And again, I am not doing this in anguish. I'm doing this with a sense of hope. If the federal government broke the promise of Reconstruction and went into Jim Crowism for a year, created the atmosphere for the hanging fruit. 4,000, mostly African Americans, were killed, and then created a scheme of discrimination that was suffered in the South, that Black folk lived under a horror of terror, could not vote, had to walk on the street when a white person walked down. Black folk left their homes to buy groceries in the Deep South and never returned. Countless numbers that you could go and listen to stories that auntie left, daddy left, grandpa left, and never came back home, or that uppity young man left, or the horrors of 1955 of Emmett Till, when they wouldn't view him as a 14-year-old boy just being mischievous. They wouldn't give him that dignity that he was a child, and they beat him without recognition. It was the stigma of racism and the stigma of the divide that we never healed, we never apologized, we never said we could work together. And as a hand, we are better like the fingers on a hand. So HR 40 tries to bring America to that. We tried to bring America to the point of the Constitution that says we've come to create a more perfect union. We've tried to bring America to recognize the 13th Amendment is real, slavery has ended. We've tried to bring America to the 14th Amendment of due process. We tried to bring America to the 15th Amendment of our right to vote. Right now, I speak to you as a broken person because I love my district so much, and I have been now victimized by the Republican hierarchy and literally imploded the district of Barbara Jordan. I am bent and bowed, but I am not broken forever. And we are standing, as I'm talking to you, there's a Zoom call on how do we put the broken pieces back together? How do we take the Barbara Jordan district? Why does that befall an African American? This is not the regular districting process. We know what redistricting is. We win some and we lose some. This is taking a district and just tearing it apart, tearing the historic parts about. So what HR 40 says, let's calm down about race. Let's understand that if we can fill in the gaps of disparities, if we can close the wealth gap, which is anywhere between $17,000 for a family of four that are African Americans and $174,000 for a white family. If we can stop Black men from being the fodder for the criminal justice system or for encounters with the police. If we can begin to live side by side in housing developments that will come about because of Build Back Better, if we can render children's that will all children will be able to go to kindergarten or childcare for young mothers to be able to work, and they will be African American mothers, or 2 years of free college tuition that would then allow those who have not been able to finish school to have a leg up. The reparations is not a dollar sign. It is the seismic infrastructure change that will get America to recognize all of her citizens as equal. It will lift a boat of African Americans, but it'll lift a boat of migrants and immigrants. We will truly become that country that has an economic engine that uses all of God's children, all of the labor of God's children in a fair and just way. We'll provide jobs that all people can work on. And we have been tainted and maligned that we are trying to get a check. The ultimate results may be compensation, but Sheila Jackson Lee will not make that decision. We will have an outstanding commission of people from around the nation. We will have hearings, which I specifically put in the language. Don't sit in Washington, go out and listen to rural Iowa to see if they can understand that reparations is an international concept of repair and restoration. It is not anger and frustration. It is not take, but it is giving. And so this legislation is written simply. It is written to get us started with a commission. It is written to bring us into the 21st century. There are universities and states. There are countries in the Scandinavian community that have developed reparations for Caribbean countries. We're the only ones that are behind. And it was intended to capture the essence of General Sherman's Special Field Order number 15. And it was intended to heal. And I think the worst thing that could have happened to us is the breach of Reconstruction and the lack of the continuation of African Americans, freed slaves being in Congress and governors and others and business persons, and snatching that away. And then the taking away of us so that we couldn't go to school with Johnny because Johnny was white and we were Black. And that seized us for a whole century and made GIs come home with no GI Bill if they lived in Southern states, or it took away Social Security, because if you're a domestic, you didn't get it. So I am grateful for you allowing me to be here today. And I'm going to end by simply saying, because Jan and Sheila love each other. We have been together in Congress for a very long time. We serve as Chief Deputy Whips. She is the wonderful senior Chief Deputy Whip. She serves you so very well. But one thing we also loved mutually is our late colleague, John Robert Lewis. We walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge so many times with him, but he seeped into our DNA. Certainly as a little younger person, I walked the plantations of the Deep South to register sharecroppers who exist today. And I was confronted by those people who were their overseers, for lack of a better term, to get off their property. Don't register these people to vote. In the 20th century of the United States of America, John Lewis shed blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but he was one of the first members to support H.R. 40 and boldly would stand and talk about it, and was the lead member who created the Smithsonian, which is the wonderment of the Museum of Culture and History of African Americans, not in anger, but to educate. And so John Lewis's book is for all of us, and I'm going to continue to do this. I need my colleagues, I need multiple Jans, and I need multiple synagogues like this wonderful Beth Emmett, and to the rabbi for your wonderful help. I close with saying 300 organizations across America, including many Jewish organizations and a rabbinical council, many religious organizations, social service, civil rights. But I have kept this little book, the last book that John Lewis penned before his death, untimely death, Carry On. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to carry on in the wonderful Midwest. That's the heartland. And if the heartland is with us, I know we're going to get H.R. 40 passed. Carry on. Thank you all so very much for having me.
Oh, we are so honored to have you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Yeah, that was tremendous. Thank you. Thank you. I had the privilege and the honor and the challenge of crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge with members of the Second Baptist Church in 2013. We brought our teens from our two congregations on a civil rights trip together, on a Sankofa trip, and that was quite an incredible experience to walk over that bridge and to really commit at that time that we had to see the racial tensions in this country be addressed, that we had to make amends for the wrongs that this country had perpetrated on our Black siblings. We just completed our High Holy Day period in which we focus on the idea of what we call in Hebrew tshuva, which means repentance and making amends, going back and offering apologies and committing to doing better in the future and making amends for what we've done in the past. We spent an entire month on that particular issue. And so here we are, you know, in the Jewish community, really committed to knowing that we spend our holy days focused on this topic, and that we are committed to doing this with you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. And we're really excited about the momentum that has built, and we do pledge that we will do whatever we can to continue to move this forward, both locally and on a federal level. And so I would like to just open up by asking the question of, some people have asked a question around, what's the connection between the federal reparations effort and a local reparations effort? If somebody receives reparations locally, what happens if HR 40 is passed, if reparation is studied, and then eventually there's reparations on a federal level? How will these two work together, the federal and the local? I don't know if Congresswoman Jackson Lee and Ru Simmons want to take that, or anybody else on the panel. And then if you also have other questions for me, please make sure you put them in the chat and I will pose them to our panelists today. Robin?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. So no, this is a separate initiative. It is the responsibility of Evanston. So any national or federal reparations initiative should not in any way jeopardize benefits that will be delivered here in Evanston. We support HR 40, and we made that clear for many years, while we are also doing what is our responsibility as a local government. So there should be no conflict, but the commission has to be seated and that work will begin. And the remedies and initiatives for HR 40 will be determined by the commission.
Rabbi,
Thank you.
if I could just say something, this is Jan Schakowsky.
Mhm.
On a political level, having things happen both at the local level or at the state level and at the federal level creates the kind of momentum we need. The details can be worked out. They will be worked out, and each jurisdiction can take responsibility for reparations. But the more activity there is at any level of government to help move this along. One thing I wanted to credit Sheila with, the Judiciary Committee, for the very first time in the history of the United States, passed HR 40 out of committee. That's the furthest that it has ever gone, past one hurdle within the Congress of the United States. But we should be encouraging municipalities
Please.
and levels of government to continue with their own reparations efforts. It all feeds together.
Thank you. A few questions that have come in. One question has been about why are tenants left out of the Evanston reparations plan? I think my understanding was also that it was for homeowners. And the other question is anything that Illinois is doing around reparations as a state at this time?
Thank you. So it's important to note that this is our first initiative. This is being funded by sales tax from cannabis, which is coming in incrementally. The programs are rolling out in the same way. So we've only designated the first 4% of the program. We should be encouraged that we have $9,600,000 plus all of the incoming reparations contributions to do more initiatives. And I'm sure that will follow. But again, that is to be determined by future community-led discussions, Black community members weighing in on what they would like to see, and the committee making that recommendation based on the Black community input. And in terms of what's happening at the state of Illinois, last summer, there was an introduction by Rep. Will Davis for reparations in the state of Illinois, and there's not been any movement. So that is another great place. As Congresswoman Schakowsky just mentioned, we need it at every level of government. That is our hope here in Evanston. And so please contact, our state reps. Will Davis was who made the original introduction, but any of our state reps could be helpful there.
I'd like to answer the question before. I'm sorry, I got disconnected again. The HR 40 is the umbrella. It'd be, as the federal government is the anchor for setting the tone, it would not preclude individual actions by nonprofits, faith institutions, and others. But we will begin the study, the work that would go across the country, taking in the information about the actual data that showed in all parts of the country the inadequacies or the deficiencies and inequities of the African-American condition, if you will. And I frankly believe, because many people are interested in this concept with the indigenous community, the Native American community, a study like this and then the development of reparation proposals certainly would have some impact. Native Americans, of course, were not made whole in their mind, but had a certain different agreement. But I believe this legislation can lift all boats, because what it would do is it would set a new regimen of social reconditioning and transformation. And it would certainly help the pockets of African-American that are extensive. The Delta still exists. Most people don't know in Mississippi. And that data there, at least in my last knowledge, I'm sure there have been some improvements working with their congresspersons, but it's still a very unique place of African-American. Places in the southern states, places in Texas that face these inequities. And of course, I call it up south, down south, east south on the east and west south. You'll have these pockets of inequities. And I just think that when you provide these opportunities, it helps everyone. So that's what this will do. This will be the federal law that provides the hearings, the research, and the development of proposals, which could in fact be helpful to all communities. I think that would be a very special part of what HR 40 could do.
Thank you. Congresswoman Jackson Lee, one additional question to add to that for you. The National Council of Churches and COBRA, national denominations, and others co-signed a letter in support of HR 40. How can we as a congregation or as individuals sign on to this and to
Well,
show our
first of all,
support?
I want to acknowledge your Senator Durbin, who is
Yes.
an outstanding co-sponsor of the bill in the Senate, led by Senator Booker, and we're so proud of at least a quarter of the senators have signed on. So with your vast network, it would be powerful if you began a faith in the form of synagogues across America, which are fall in all categories of political persuasion. But if they could see the value and yet harmless intent of HR 40 to be able to, now remember, when you ask members of Congress to vote for issues, it is not politics, it is policy. And to be able to push the policy of HR 40, the rightness of HR 40, and try and encourage members of Congress that they know to urge this bill going to the floor of the House. That is could be monumental. Your own press conference, your own statement of solidarity, your own statement of the rightness of HR 40, working with the faith churches that you've been collaborating in. Certainly, I want to thank Reverend Nabors, Pastor Nabors as well, and all those who are on to just do a network, just have a network that cannot be broken that says it is time for passing HR 40 and for it to go to the president's desk and to sign.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question that has come about the local initiative that we know that the city of Evanston has its fund through the taxing of cannabis, but there's also through the Evanston Community Foundation, a private fund. How can people donate? Do they donate directly to the Evanston Community Foundation? And what is the goal of how much money is trying to be raised by Evanston Community Foundation for this effort?
Thank you. Those goals are being established by the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston that is forming a board to be appointed in January, if I'm not mistaken. But you can donate or contribute actually at the Evanston Community Foundation website, and it'll allow you to choose the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston. And I'm sorry, Dr. Nabors probably could have answered that, and I maybe have left something out.
Robin, I think that you're on the money. The board is in the process of continuing to be established. We have, I think, about 9 or 10, and our goal is to probably get 18. And those members of the board are from historically Black houses of worship in Evanston, and also sororities and fraternities. And you're right on target. Folks can make contributions to the Evanston Community Foundation. All they have to do is go to the website and look up RSAE, Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston. And we will be working on establishing a president and also other officers of that board at their first meeting in January. We have already met once, and we will be meeting for the rest of the year. And let me say very quickly, Rabbi, I hope that this is very helpful. I don't know if anybody's going to ask this question, but we're excited about other areas and localities around the country that are doing reparations as well. We're excited about Asheville and also Durham. We're excited about High Point, North Carolina. We're excited about what's happening in San Francisco and even the town of my birth, Kalamazoo. There are folks that are very, very interested in reparations, and they are even right now working on resolutions to present it to their city councils. And a lot of this work is being done through local branches of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And so we're excited about bringing that organization into this effort. And that really worked well when Robin actually approached the NAACP in Evanston, and we were able to join after she laid the enormous groundwork for making reparations happen in Evanston. So I want you to know we have branches all around the country. So we have people in place and ready. And I think that what Congressman Jackson Lee talked about with regard to houses of worship, I think we can say the same thing, hopefully, about NAACP branches everywhere.
I've seen that some people have put into the chat a link to the Evanston Community Foundation Fund and also to the City of Evanston. I don't know, Pastor Nabors or Robin, if you have a preference of where people make donations to the City of Evanston or Evanston Community Foundation, or if it doesn't make a difference.
No preference
Okay, thank
for
you. I
me.
just
Mhm.
just wanted to make sure we see that those links are in the chat, and we'll also make sure that we send them out to people later. But if you click on it now, then it'll be available on your computer later if you just want to be able to make that donation. Another question about the local effort. Many of us who've been involved in this and have heard the conversations around the community, that some in the community have said that this is a nice housing program that we're doing, but it's not reparations. And I know that Pastor Nabors and Robin, you're looking at me, yeah, I've heard this a lot. How do you answer that question when people say this is a housing program and it's not reparations? What is reparations, and how do you distinguish it from other kinds of initiatives?
Well, I'll start with that. That is something that has been said for a long time. And I would say that if you line 100 people up and ask them to define what a reparations program is, you might get 50 different answers. So I think that everybody has a right to believe what reparations is and what it isn't. Robin and I and others certainly believe that this is a reparations movement. And I think that she was spot on when she said that this is the first initiative for reparations in Evanston, and it only includes 4% of the 100% of the $10 million. So we're talking about $400,000. What is left out of this discussion, which I think is very important, is that this first initiative is geared toward housing. And I think that housing is probably the largest issue with regard to the damage that has been done against the Black community over the years, because housing, as you all know, is the one particular area where generational wealth can move and be created. And so the fact that we're doing something with regard to housing is very important. And keep in mind, the community overall and the Black community especially will be able to make a determination about how $9,600,000 is going to be spent in the future.
And
I'm going to add.
I'd like to add to that, if I might. We do ourselves a disservice around the question of reparations by defining with limitations, because the idea is to go into repair and restore. The federal bill will be the umbrella. It will go deeply into what is needed. And that may be a portion of compensation. We are not walking away from it. We have not even gotten to the point of having America accept the responsibility for slavery, the original sin, and the breach where the original promise in the relief from slavery was never kept.
Yeah.
And the proposed goodwill, I haven't gotten into General Sherman's DNA. I'm sure there was some other ulterior motive, but the proposed goodwill never was fulfilled. But you just have to look at the 20th century. We wasted a lot of time in the 20th century with the horrors of segregation, really violent segregation, racism, violence, purposeful mistreatment. You never were able to get your foot in the door because you lived, whether you were up north or down south or east south or west south, with this horror of race and race divide. You were purposely, as an African American, kept in your place. It made people feel good, or they carried the South attitudes, or they still kept the promise of the 1880s and the compromise. They still held to it. How can you in the 1940s have returning soldiers from World War II being treated better than German prisoners? How can you have the GI Bill, even with the integration of the military by President Truman, how can you have the GI Bill be governed by states And so I go to South Carolina, I go to Mississippi, I go to Texas. I don't get the GI Bill. And I am made into a boy, and I can't help my family. There's something called Levittown in Long Island. I
Yes.
couldn't get my down payment from the GI Bill and go over to Levittown and put my little bungalow that then ultimately could be passed on to my children in the passage of wealth. I couldn't do that. But first of all, I suffered from redlining. So the transfer of wealth, which is a tradition of America, even if it was a little bungalow today, it will be magnificent tomorrow because of the invested wealth in homes, in real estate. In addition, I lost real estate. It was a known activity for counties and others to take land away from Black people that they had gone. And that was an activity of the 20th century. Black folk who had left land, Black folk who was trying to stay on their land, missed a tax date, that was the end of your land. They took it by the acres. So again, this is factual. This is not attacking. And so people need to understand there has to be a multiple of responses to the question of slavery and the question of healing and the question of repair and reparative justice. And so it may be a number of things. And I think what was done in Evanston, Illinois was a significant operative example of how painless reparations can be and how many people can be helped by that approach, which is what we want to do. So I don't, there are people have put numbers on it. We're very gratified to have the U.S. Conference of Mayors. They said $16 trillion. I'm glad to have their support. There's some other professors doing research and have other numbers. My job as a legislator and Jan's job as a legislator, we put the infrastructure in place. We put the commission in place. We put the scholars, we put the hard workers, we put in COBRA, we put the African-American Commission on Reparations, we put the persons who've been meeting for years on Thursday at 12 noon, we put them in place to be able to now help us write the story. And when we get in the quagmire of the pitting one amount of money against another amount of money, then Jan and I can't do our job to get the legislation to the president's desk and get it operable. And do something that the world would watch and say, America has actually said, I'm sorry, they've actually sought to repair, and they're not going to be caught up in what happened in South Africa. They're going to get it done because they're going to have an action item. They've got to do proposals. Remember the Kerner report? It's set there. Magnificent report. We don't want it to sit there because we've now made so many friends like you at Beth Emmett and the 300 organizations plus and Pastor Nabors. We've made friends. It's not going to sit there. It's going to get worked on and implemented. Forgive me. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So what do you think the prospects are of getting, HR 40 to be voted on in the time frame? Now that there's actually some momentum behind it.
I'm an optimist. We need your effort. We need we need 100 Jans. And we're trying to get it done. We're working on the strategy right now to get it to the floor or to find the pathway for it to be operable.
Sheila, can I, Rabbi, can I ask
Yeah.
a question of Sheila?
Of course.
Sheila, is reparations so defined right now as to individuals? Is there ever a talk about reparations for institutional reform, for communities that are suffering, that kind of thing? Or is it reparations to descendants of slaves? Is it ever public as opposed to individual?
And it is not, Jan, thank you, Congresswoman Schakowsky, for that. It is not mutually exclusive. You're brilliant. That's what we want the commission to do. That's what we keep telling people. We do not want to close the door on the work of the commission because I think institutions, HBCUs, are a vital part of our community. That's been talked about. The whole question of the health disparities have been talked about, but we don't want to be mutually exclusive in terms, since it's governmental sanction, governmental actions on what the government may ultimately decide that they can do. that may be rational and reasonable. But certainly institutional restructuring or giving the criminal justice system, for example. We believe that the repair and restoration, Barbara Lee, as you well know, is working with me. She's a strong supporter of this, but also very much a strong supporter of restoration and reconciliation. But we believe that we can find a pathway in the proposals that reaches your concept, and then the commission can talk about all other aspects. We don't rule out the compensation, but I think people will find the idea of proposals very attractive if it deals with the harshness of institutions and we see a reform in those institutions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure that our wonderful panelists have any final remarks you'd like to make before we wrap up tonight. Anything that you would have liked to say, any questions that were not asked, that were missed? We'd just love to hear your final thoughts if you have any.
Thank you, Rabbi London, for the opportunity. One thing that's been happening that's very important is the development of companion resources and other benefits that can add value to our commitment here in Evanston. And we have support from experts, including one of your own members, using their expertise and networks to connect us to financial institutions, to find reparative mortgage products and other financial products so that we have access to that for the program. We have a reparations resource guide that is in development, and it will be released by the RSAE, that has a list of Black businesses that you can use with your reparation benefit, realtors and residential contractors and closing attorneys, as well as the banks that are going to provide fair lending and products. In addition to that, we have a community wealth day, and you'll hear more about that in the community. It's scheduled for December 4th. It'll be at Faith Temple Church, and that will be to support and lift up and empower the work of reparations. And so we understand that we have a lot of work ahead of us here in Evanston, that this initiative alone will not solve the wealth gap. We're aware of that, but it is a tangible first step, and we're working really hard. And please do stay engaged and give us your feedback so we can improve the work.
If I might.
Yes, please.
Offer, let me, Pastor Nabors, you want to go ahead and say something, and then I'll follow you?
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, just very quickly, I want to certainly echo the sentiments of Robin, but I also want to say, if there are folks who are listening in from around the country and sort of living in municipalities and towns and cities, and they're wondering how they can begin this process, I think they need to be in touch with us in Evanston, and particularly with Robin, because we have a model that we have followed very closely, and we've been prodigious in making sure that we have recorded everything. We have volumes of files on information that is very important for every step of the process that we've taken. And Congresswoman, we simply want to be available to other towns and cities that are at a point right now where they're interested in HR 40, no question about it. But also, as you mentioned, they want to do something locally that might help rev up the engine at the national and federal level. So we want to make ourselves available. And I think that we've done something that can be replicated and modeled in different areas around the country. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
That was excellent what you have shared, and excellent what Councilmember Ru Simmons has shared, and Rabbi London giving us this opportunity. Absolutely, I think those who are listening around the country, we don't want to preclude any opportunity to bolster HR 40, which is the ultimate goal of reparations in a federal law. I also commend people to study California, whose governor has signed an HR 40 replica, and its task force is working, though they are seeking guidance from us in Washington of how to proceed. But the point is that we want to give credence to all the local activities. And we welcome your volumes. I'm certainly going to see how we can access, Councilmember has always said that she's available, some of the data that you may have, which I think will be very pertinent. Once this commission comes up, I think maybe they should hit out to Evanston as one of the first hearings, so that they can see something in place that is tangible that they can see. But let me leave on the record to say, so that you will understand that what you're doing in Evanston is valuable. So just bear with me. 1968, a typical middle-class Black household had 6,674 in wealth, and that includes, if they owned a house, but you would likely think not. And a white middle class was 70,786, and that 6,674 was Black middle class. 2016, the typical middle class Black household was 13,000. That's the numbers I was using in 24, versus 149,703 for the median white household. As of 2016, you would have to combine the net worth of 11.5 Black households to get the net worth of typical white household, one of them. Only 44% of Black households own their own homes, which is what Evanston is doing, compared to 74% of whites. The Black home ownership rate has not changed from the late 1960s. And then finally, here's what's been happening all around us. For example, in 2005, J.P. Morgan Company, prominent slaveholder, tried to make amends for its role in the slave trade with an apology and $5 million, 5-year scholarship, Congresswoman, fund for Black undergraduates in Louisiana. That's what J.P. Morgan did. In 2008, the Episcopal Church apologized for perpetrating American slavery through its interpretation of the Bible, and certain dioceses have implemented restitution programs. And in 2003, Brown University created the Committee on Slavery and Justice to assess the university's role in slavery and determine the response. Finally, in 2016, Georgetown University apologized for its historical links to slavery and said it would give a missions edge to descendants of slaves whose sale in the 19th century helped to pay off the school's debt. Well, you will get pros and cons and yays and nays, but there is a thirst for repair and restoration. And I would just simply say, let us do it with our eyes open, with everyone at the table, with the commission, and with the recognition of those like the organizations that have been at the forefront in COBRA and the Commission to Study Reparations, and others, NAACP, Urban League, and many others at the table as well, and multicultural groups, so that we can get this federal law in place and we can finally find a place of healing in the United States of America.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Congresswoman Schakowsky, any final words?
Well, I just want to thank you, Rabbi London, for inviting me to be part of this. I'm so honored to be with this panel, and really want to leave mainly the last word with Sheila Jackson Lee, who is such a champion, such a hero, and tireless in the fight for justice. I'm just proud to be part of this effort with all of you.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Such a
Yeah,
friend.
thank you to our amazing panelists, to our local leaders, to Robin Rue Simmons and Pastor Nabors, to our ever wonderful Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and Congresswoman Jackson Lee. To have you here has been such an honor, a privilege. You have taught us so much. You have motivated us. I mean, you've really given us a very, very strong call to action, which I'm just going to emphasize that we need to be writing to our congresspeople. And we have congresspeople here in our area, but if we outside of this area, to get people to be supportive of HR 40. I'm glad to hear that Senator Durbin's doing it on the Senate side, but we will also certainly be motivating our religious body, the part of the reform movement. We are part of an organization both here in Illinois and nationally as well. And we will be making sure that we get all of those organizations to be supportive of this effort. We're also going to be continuing our education here at Beth Emmett, and Lisa and Matt will talk about that in a moment. We found out ways in which we can support financially. So we have a lot of things now that are on our agenda and things that we can do and will continue to do. And thank you, Robin, for telling us about the event that's going to be on December 4th. That's my birthday. So it'll be a great way to come and celebrate my birthday. So I'll put that out there on my Facebook page. Come celebrate my birthday, to come into the Community Wealth Day. I would be really honored to be able to be there and to be able to be supportive of that action, and to let us know about the companion resources and ways in which people are supporting you through their expertise and in banking and other ways. Thank you, We will continue to be in touch. This is just the beginning of our conversation here at Beth Emmett. And again, a hearty thank you to the education, the enthusiasm, the move towards justice on this very important issue for our country and for our local community. Lisa and Matt, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi London. And wow, thank you, panelists. What an evening. I am so humbled by your words. And I just, again, want to thank our wonderful and esteemed panelists for sharing their expertise and insight about Black American history and the reparations movement, both nationally and locally. Thank you for everyone here who took action by taking the time to learn about this and become more engaged about this valuable and very important topic. For Beth Emmett members on the call, I want to highlight 3 upcoming meetings and events that you can follow up with to continue to take action. Grab your Post-it, pencil, phone, or also know these will all be advertised in Emmett Mail. The next Social Action Committee meeting is Wednesday night, November 3rd at 6 p.m. on Zoom. And there are 2 more planned opportunities to learn and discuss reparations. The first of which is November 17th, a Wednesday evening at 7 on Zoom. And then in December, on Tuesday, December 14th at 7 o'clock as well. So more details to come on those. They'll be in Emmett Mail. Look for the details there. Email myself, Rabbi London, Rabbi Memis Fuller with any questions. And again, just thank you to all the panelists and people here tonight. I know I'm leaving inspired and ready to continue this work together. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Good to see you, Jan. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember, Pastor, Rabbi, Lisa.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
So.